a purgar una condena de 12 años y estuve nada más 6 meses.
And how comes you only did 6 months?
Vuelvo a lo mismo. Corrupción.
And their governments do. They can buy any form of intelligence services. No, I knew I had to root out the people that were coming at me.
What does it really take to earn a spot in a cartel? How far do recruits have to go to prove their loyalty through brutal initiation rituals? And perhaps most chillingly, what sinister secrets do these notorious drug trafficking empires guard from the rest of the world? These and many more will be answered as we take a look at 10 ex-cartel members and drug traffickers exposing the industry, starting with the confessions of this man.
How big is the cartel that you work for?
Es grandísimo el cártel, lo conforman cerca de 27 miembros, arriba, cerca de 14 países, tanto Estados Unidos, Centroamérica, México, Colombia, Canadá. Hay organizaciones que llegan a ser mundiales.
Ross Kemp, the renowned English actor, author, and television presenter, ventured into the world of YouTube with his channel, Ross Kemp Extreme World, where he filmed a series of encounters with the most dangerous people known to mankind. On one particular occasion, he met up with a former cartel member, who remained anonymous for obvious reasons, but the revelations that came with this interview were nothing short of jaw-dropping.
Es una organización fantástica. Trabaja como reloj suizo, perfecto.
Let's talk specifically about the United States of America. How did you get the drugs into the United States?
Vía terrestre, y una de las principales que se manejó mucho y se ganó mucho fue por medio de avión, por vía aérea. En Estados Unidos el 50 al 45% de las aerolíneas están miscuidas en este negocio, efectivamente.
The involvement of commercial airlines in trafficking drugs throughout the U.S. is a story that has been widely reported for years. And while that in itself is crazy to even imagine, this ex-cartel member wasn't done exposing the industry.
Te mochan las manos, el mensaje es que no andes de ratero, no andes agarrando lo que no es tuyo. Cuando les mochan la lengua es porque andan hablando demasiado. Y no quiero que sea mi caso por estar hablando esto, ¿eh?
Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, has to be one of the hardest hit cities by Mexican drug trade. Ranked as the 10th most dangerous city in the world, it faces an alarming homicide rate, with 90% of these deaths tied directly to drug trafficking. It's been a major hotspot for cartels, and now we're about to find out why.
So right now, there are 5 cartels fighting for control of Juárez.
Era por la que más se puede trabajar el tráfico de drogas y de armas. Algo que no hemos tocado, el tráfico de armas. A cualquier parte, cualquier parte. Cultura de todo esto es la corrupción. Es una cadena. Se corre la voz internamente, en secreto. Ahí a veces hasta el que no es corrupto se hace corrupto por el dinero. El dinero corrompe, el dinero es el que los corrompe.
Did you ever have any contact with people in the United Kingdom?
En Europa es Londres, España.
If you don't get it already, let us spell it out for you. The drug trade isn't just a Mexican or U.S. issue. It's a global operation, with nearly every country vying for a piece of the pie. But how do these cartels manage to stay connected across the world?
How does somebody from Juárez make a connection to sell cocaine in London?
Se envía gente, el mismo cartel envía gente hacia la ciudad de Londres, se abre una plaza, se empieza a vender droga, empieza la corrupción, llega la policía, se le compra, se le propone.
The police in London know.
Sí.
That was a pretty bold statement to make, and considering how much money gets thrown around in the drug market, Ross, being curious, asked how much the cartel member and his crew made from working with cartels, and you won't believe the answer.
Y cuando ya se acabó todo este negocio, me rastrearon y los perdí, pero era cerca de $780,000.
No doubt, that's a massive amount of money, but it comes with a steep price. And for this guy, he paid the price when he got caught by law enforcement.
Llevaron a un lugar aislado, un cuarto. De la tortura, quitaron, como te dije, pinzas. Me quitaron uñas de los pies con pinzas, agujas entre las yemas de los dedos, descargas eléctricas en mis testículos, agua mineral con chile piqué, limón y sal por la nariz. La tortura duró aproximadamente un día, cero información.
When you were in prison, how long did you serve, and were you protected by the cartel inside the prison?
Estuvieron mandando dinero a mi familia mientras estuve En la cárcel iba a purgar una condena de 12 años y estuve nada más 6 meses.
And how comes you only did 6 months?
Vuelvo a lo mismo, corrupción.
I mean, if a low-level cartel member can pull in over 600 grand from drug trafficking, then how much are the guys at the top really making? And what kind of power and influence do they hold behind the scenes? One man who has all the answers is...
We have George Valdez, who was at one time one of the biggest drug traffickers in the U.S. during the 70s and 80s.
You guys definitely seen movies with drug lords in sleek black suits, strolling along Miami Beach, stacking briefcases of cocaine cash, charming their way around women. Well, that kind of story might just be about Jorge Valdez, because he actually lived that life. You see, Valdez was a Cuban-American drug kingpin working closely with the Medellin cartel in the 80s. Originally born in Cuba, Valdez moved to the U.S. as a teenager and got sucked into the world of drug trafficking in Miami. After a few years, he became the head of the Medellin cartel's operations in the U.S., tracking about 95% of the cocaine supplied to the country, raking in billions of dollars for Escobar, and billions more for himself. This guy was incredibly powerful. He had direct connections with presidents, generals, sicarios, Hollywood stars, and even kidnappers. But after a few years, he was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. While locked up, 2 other Medellin cartel figures, Sal Magluta and Willie Falcon, took over his role until the cartel's eventual downfall. Once released, he completely turned his life around. But if there's anybody that knows the Medellin cartel like the back of their hand, it's this guy. And these are some of the most mind-blowing things he's exposed about their operations, including him claiming there would have been no Medellin cartel without him.
La Puerta del Sol was the original drug front for the Medellin drug cartel.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, so I'll reveal this on your TV. There was no Medellin drug cartel. So that's something that's really interesting. No one's ever talked about this. That was a name that the Americans gave us. This group was composed of 4 people and me. This group was the group that became known as the Medellin drug cartel, because the Medellin drug cartel didn't get his name till 1980.
He goes on to talk about how he struck a deal with the USDEA after he got busted with $7 million worth of coke in Panama.
Attorney General comes. And I looked at him, I said, look, don't waste your time and mine. All I want to know is 2 things. How much to get my cocaine back? How much to get out of here? He's like, Noriega already sold you cocaine, $250,000 for you to get out. I said, I gave him a number. I said, use this code and use this number and your money will be here tomorrow. Sure enough, 2 days later, he comes and said, the money's here. We're going to fly you to Panama City. They're going to rough you up a little bit in front of the DEA just to make you look good, and just stick to your story that you were looking for, you were actually selling guns to the Sandinistas. And I'm like, good.
But when he got to Panama City, things took a wild turn.
It took me and this guy, Harold, into a dungeon, and then they went and tortured us for 25 days. 30 days, they tortured us in ways that you can never, ever imagine. No food, just drip of water, no toilets or nothing, just a dirty, stinking floor in this dungeon.
Eventually, he used his connections to get out, but his freedom didn't last. He was eventually arrested, like we talked about, but here's what he actually did inside prison.
I'd be whatever. So I decided to go back to school and to study. And when everybody was quiet, about 5 o'clock in the morning, I was reading and taught myself Greek, finished another bachelor's, half of a master's, and when I was released, I finished my master's and then earned a PhD.
You can't deny it. The guy's life is straight out of a Hollywood script. He went from making over $100 million a month to serving time behind bars, only to come out and earn a PhD. That's a transformation you don't really see every day. Now, while he's left the drug game behind, he could very well be the most successful drug dealer most people have never heard of.
That a lot of people never heard, except for the government, is that I run this like a business. I didn't run it like most drug dealers run it, where to them it's a big party and they're out there with a fanfare. And literally what they're doing is just, flaunting all that drug money right in their face of the agents. And I said, look, you can win a battle. You're not going to win the war. So there's never been a wiretap of me. There's never been a picture of me with a compromising individual. And I went to my office 8 o'clock in the morning every day and left at 6, 7 o'clock. That's the first thing. I bought a big old mansion. I had a fleet of airplanes, yachts. I dated the most beautiful woman in America. I mean, the first guy to bring massive amounts of cocaine to California.
But speaking of high-ranking cartel members, JC, a former drug dealer for the infamous Mexican cartel, La Familia Michoacan, had a few things to say about his time working for the cartel.
So you're about a 10, 11 when you've got a pistol and you're putting in work.
Yeah. Remember the first day I made like 1,200 and I was like 15 years old, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh man.
Right. That's a lot of rocks.
I was like, can I stay here working all night?
Mm-hmm.
When JC got to college, he decided to build his own drug trafficking network. He connected with a dealer in Michoacan, Mexico, driving over 2,000 miles from Chicago to the heart of that region just to pick up the product himself.
How long is that drive from Chicago all the way down to Michoacan, Mexico?
It was long, man. I can't even.
Like, it would take you a couple of days?
Yeah.
At least it was worth it, because according to him, he started making a ton of money. But barely 2 years in, things went down the drain for him.
How you ended up getting popped?
Well,
Was it a tip-off?
Nah, I got sloppy. I was doing a lot of coke. I was drinking. My head was like this big. I thought I was like Superman.
So what was your sentence?
I ended up getting 15 years in Mexico.
And you did?
4.
But in those 4 years, JC got to experience what life was like in a Mexican prison.
Music was playing. They were sleeping with girls, doing drugs.
Yeah.
Like they were enjoying their time.
Yeah.
The time wasn't like spent trying to kill and gangbang with somebody.
Those were the people that had money, though.
Yeah.
So you didn't have money, though.
I was doing all the stuff that everybody else was doing. I had carpet in my cell. I had, a big screen TV. I was walking around in my Nike suit.
Tacos? Did you get better food?
There was restaurants in there that I ate at.
I guess all the allegations about Mexican prisons are true. And now we understand why almost every Mexican drug lord dreads the idea of getting extradited and incarcerated in the US. But here's the thing. After JC got out, he didn't just quit drug trafficking. He went back to moving cocaine. But this time, for the Sinaloa cartel. He smuggled the product by car. But eventually a fellow trafficker set him up, landing him in a U.S. federal prison. Now JC has completely turned his life around and runs a legitimate business in the U.S. The same goes for a former cartel member who has now found faith and serves as a pastor. But his journey to redemption came after facing some of the darkest moments of his life. Dr. Hal Bradley is a pastor in the Pacific Northwest. But before he joined the ministry and became a counselor, he was a lieutenant and underboss for the Sinaloa cartel during the 70s and 80s. Fresh out of the Marines, Dr. Hal reconnected with friends he made on a trip to Mexico as a teenager, only to find out they were now part of a major crime syndicate. Long story short, he joined up and became responsible for their operations in the Northwest United States. He would work closely with Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, and then with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, as he was in charge of distributing narcotics from Portland, Oregon to Alaska, and then on through to Canada. This guy was undoubtedly a cartel boss, but while dealing with these people, Bradley's life took a wild turn.
Personally, I did meet him a few times in Jalisco when he had transferred to Guadalajara and set up his organization there. That's where I knew Rafael Caracantero, and he was from Culiacan, Sinaloa area.
Right.
Rafa and Chapo. And at that time, Chapo was just a weed merchant like I was, so that's how I knew Chapo,
So you knew Chapo from the weed days?
Yes, I did.
That's how long...
I sent you a picture of me with Chapo, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. I would be careful showing that. I remember having dinner at certain ranches where I would see bound people load into the back of the truck, hear the crack in the distance, and 30 minutes later, they're coming back, sitting at the same table with me eating dinner.
A few years later, Dr. Hal took his wife to El Chapo's wedding to beauty queen Emma Coronel Aspuro. And from that moment on, his life was never the same.
I was required to take her to the wedding, and that's when she saw who I really was. And I watched the love leave her eyes. And then they told her when our son would be 12, that they wanted him to come to Culiacan, and they would put him in school, and they would make him the next blonde-haired, blue-eyed generation.
Right.
After the wedding, Dr. Hal turned himself over to the cops and got convicted of drug trafficking charges. He was initially handed a life sentence, but due to his cooperation, it was reduced to just 8 years. After his sentence, Dr. Hal made the decision to help the U.S. government dismantle the organizations he was once working for. He worked closely with the DEA and other anti-drug agencies to raid cartel operations in Mexico and other Latin American countries. But just as he was about to retire and give up on everything, the Sinaloa cartel sent a sicario to take him out.
But he was extremely skilled and well-trained, and He had stabbed me multiple times before. And at the same time, he's delivering blows to various parts of my body, immobilizing my body.
Right.
And I'm 65 years old, getting just totally mauled by this guy.
Luckily, that hitman left him, thinking he was already dead. Hal was able to crawl back into the house where he picked up a phone and called 911. Help arrived and he was taken to the hospital, where he received treatments for his injuries. And now Hal helps people with drug addictions as a redemption for the sins of his past.
A couple months ago, I went to the courthouse to present him with a couple of the novels, and his clerk came out and said, "You know, we still talk about you almost every day."
While Dr. Hal was busy working with El Chapo, Roger Reeves had long been in the game, helping move over $1.5 billion worth of cocaine for none other than Pablo Escobar. Roger Reeves was born in Florida, but later moved to Georgia, where he was raised in an impoverished home. At a young age, Reeves wanted to become a pilot, hoping to fly sick people to hospitals and deliver farm supplies for his family. His passion for flying took off when he paid $10 to a crop duster in Douglas to start flying lessons. Little did he know that skill shaped his future in ways he couldn't have imagined. As he got older, Reeves landed a job at the fire department, but it was his exceptional flying ability that would catch the attention of Escobar and rising drug cartels, who were in desperate need of skilled pilots. Reeves would occasionally help small companies transport shipments across states and borders. But during one trip to Mexico to collect mercury, he met someone who introduced him to the marijuana trade, and soon he was smuggling tons of marijuana from Mexico to the U.S., earning $10,000 a month, until his pay skyrocketed to over $40,000. He was living the high life, but it wasn't without a few challenges. First, he barely escaped death as he went to pick up a shipment in Caborca, Mexico. Then things would take a turn for the worse when his plane was shot down mid-flight by Mexican federal police, leading to his first capture and detention in a Mexican prison.
First off, they just take you back there, and they left me in a cell with people just coming and going, thieves and drug addicts, and they just pull them out and take them back there and beat them up. They left me there about 3 days till, it was just miserably hot.
Once he got out, his destiny intertwined with that of Barry Seal, Escobar's pilot at that time. They both met in Honduras, and from there began shipping cocaine from Colombia and Nicaragua to Arkansas. But here's the actual bombshell he drops on the industry.
She ushered us right in to see Jorge Ochoa and brought the coffee in, and he was really nice to us. So while he was there, he said, "I want you to meet my partner." So he called her, the lady went next door, and Pablo Escobar came in. Shook hands, very nice, gentle-speaking man.
From that moment on, Reeves' life changed wildly.
So by this time, was the money just pouring in?
It was more than I could imagine.
Okay, you bought 7 farms?
Yes, I bought everything.
You were buying yachts, ships, more airplanes.
Most expensive gold pieces in the world.
Okay.
One of them's worth $10 million now.
Really?
Yeah.
He was living the good life, but after his partner Barry Seal started working for the DEA to bring down Escobar, Reeves had to stay low for a while. Seal was eventually killed by a sicario, and Reeves says he knows who did it.
In the back seat, there wasn't no seats, but he had a MAC-10 gun, a machine gun pistol, and he was to make sure that I went to Louisiana. And his name was Ronaldo, and that's the one that went there with 2 other people and killed him in the parking lot of the halfway house that he was in.
Right, a guy named Ronaldo?
Ronaldo, yes, he's still doing life. One of them died.
Eventually, though, he got caught.
So I got shipped up to Germany, and I got 8 years for using a German citizen in an international crime.
All combined, you served 33 years in prison in 26 different prisons in 7 different countries and 4 continents.
That's right.
But even after all those years behind bars, he still went back to drug dealing because, in his words, he needed more money. He was caught again and got to spend some more time in prison. Yet in the end, he got an early release and reunited with his wife and kids. Nonetheless, Reeves was a criminal, and the numbers he made for Escobar and the Medellin cartel are just astronomical.
You smuggled $1 billion worth of cocaine.
Then I had another fellow that was flying for me. He lived down in Palos Verdes. My friend Jerry, he did exactly the same thing too. So he did another 30 loads.
$1.5 billion
That's right.
worth of cocaine under your watch.
Yes.
That's definitely not the type of stuff you hear every day. And speaking of what we don't get to hear every day, here's an interview with a former cartel member who managed to smuggle drugs through one of the most unexpected places imaginable, the Vatican. For context, Luis Navia was one of the biggest drug kingpins in Europe during the 90s. This guy was in charge of logistics for many cartels and gangs while he laundered his money through numerous legitimate businesses. Eventually, he got caught up in one of the largest drug busts in Europe, Operation Journey.
So Operation Journey was 14 countries joint international task force, and that's when they took me into the police station. They said, "Where's the merchandise? If you don't tell us where the merchandise, we're gonna cut you up with a bisturi, the surgeon's knife."
After all said and done, Navia didn't flinch, leading Venezuelan authorities to extradite him to the U.S.
So,
do you think you were going to spend the rest of your life in prison?
Yeah, there must have been somewhere in my brain that told me that things were going to get resolved, because if not, I think I would have just had a nervous breakdown.
He was convicted for the possession of narcotics and eventually helped out the DEA to get a lesser sentence. Once he got out, he reunited with his family and started a local decent business with all the money he made.
Obviously, there's people out there that will get themselves in debt with the cartel or with a drug dealer. They have no way to paying their debt, and they get pulled in by force.
Next up is this chilling story of Ali Gonzalez, a former sicario for the notorious Mexican cartel. Gonzalez was born in Mexico but moved to Southern California with his parents at a young age. Because of the area he lived in, he was introduced to a lot of gang violence. But the real reason he got into the cartel business is far more depraved.
How did it kind of happen that you got involved in crime?
So my father, basically, my sister when we were young, the stress of seeing that obligated me to try to kill him. Stabbed my dad a couple times. Obviously, I was barely 12. So I think that's the main reasons why I was trying to just get out of my own world, because of the destruction that my own father had done.
Father ended up doing 16 years of time, while his mother barely had enough money to put food on the table, forcing a very young Gonzalez to begin pushing drugs.
A lot of racial fighting going in because at the same time it's Mexicans against Mexicans or other Hispanic gangs. They kill one of yours, you go looking for one of them. That's how I ended up as a gunslinger or a hitman, well, however you guys want to call it, a sicario. Cartel de Sinaloa is one of the biggest ones in Mexico. Went to Sonora and I worked for the Sinaloa as well as a hitman. I worked in Morelos as well for another organization called La Familia Michoacana.
Gonzalez goes on to say about how the cartels he worked for intimidated people with violence.
So basically they want to put out a message, maybe this person took money away from the cartel, or they got involved in businesses where they didn't come through, in order to make sure that other associates don't follow the same route. They put them as an example. Once the society or the people where these people are operating, they see several heads appear in the morning with a big old message, or several pieces of bodies scattered around the city, then it's easy for you to go and ask for extortion from anybody. And they with the fear that might happen to them or to their family members, they will pay.
Then they asked him about the most violent thing he'd ever done, and his response shocked even the interviewer.
There's a lot of things, but one in particular was I was taking 2 recruits to do a task that was, these recruits obviously were new, they didn't know what they were doing. They got nervous, they came back into the car and they told me that the people that were there were armed. The recruit was panicking. I jumped out of the car, I took the rifle, busted the bullet out and cocked it back in, and I shot him again. This person was still agonizing, trying to drag himself through the pavement. The rifle jammed again, so I basically went up to him and smashed him with the butt of the rifle until his head exploded, and That was it.
Gonzalez was eventually convicted of murder in Mexico, given 30 years in prison, and although he only spent 3 years, his experience there was on a whole different level.
The cells can go anything from 11 inmates to, I've seen 16 in one cell that is meant for 4 people. A lot of people think that correctional officers are the ones that are in charge inside. They are not. The ones that are in charge are the inmates and the cartel that runs the prison system. There's a lot of bribery going on, and there's a lot of prostitution inside of prison as well with the inmates, like with the female inmates, because obviously there's prisons where there's female and male. They're in different sections, but the prison guards, their money is the female inmates.
And here's the crazy part.
There was 14 people killed. The main boss was decapitated. And they were playing basketball with his head.
That's one hell of a sight to imagine, but to his own luck, Gonzalez managed to stay alive despite all the prison riots and violence, and once he got his early release, he decided to leave the whole cartel life for good. He took the little cash he had, stole a vehicle from his superiors, and drove out of Mexico into freedom.
I was given several tasks to kill people's mothers, people's wife, and I have always objected it because that's not the person that I am. What's done is done, you know? And I think that I wouldn't change anything in my life because it makes me the person that I am today. There's no what ifs. You know? That's an imaginary world.
There's this other man who fought relentlessly for his freedom, and that's El Gordo, a former Sinaloa cartel hitman and drug smuggler based in LA, California. Born and raised in LA, El Gordo got sold by his mom at just 6 months old for a bottle of beer, and the weight of that betrayal haunted him for much of his life.
What did I do? Why did you sell me for a beer, you know? And is that I'm worth for you?
As he grew older, and as the love of his mother continued to evade him, El Gordo became a drug trafficker for small LA gangs before he was taken under the wing of El Chino Antrax of the Sinaloa cartel.
The person that was supposed to be like our leader, his name was El Chino Antrax. He was basically breaking it down, you know, to us that he wanted me, you know, in his squad because he saw that I was able to adapt to whatever like sure that we had coming or whatever assignment they had for us. I was already like clicking onto it quick.
But on one occasion, he got caught by the cops, and the level of he went through was preposterous, to say the least.
The first was they're like, I'll be handcuffed and there'll be like 5 officers have a bag over my head and like they'll like just punch me in the face. And then I wouldn't talk. So the second torture was over there they call it tehuacanazo. It's basically mineral water with powder, chili powder. They mix it up and they like basically, you know, they shake it up together with the mineral water and they stick it in your nose, and that prevents you from breathing. You know, you could actually die from that. The last torture, what they did is they stripped me down naked and they basically tied my hands, like, you know, to some poles, and they basically brought wires that was connected like to a generator, and basically they were shocking my balls. Or they call it chicharita, you know. And man, like, to be honest, I thought like, no, I was never gonna have any kids after that, because yeah, man, I basically went through hell.
El Gordo didn't snitch, not because he didn't want to, but because if he did, his bosses would have done much worse to him. He was eventually deported to Mexico, where one of his bosses used his connection to get him out. And at this point, El Gordo was in too deep, even though he didn't really like his job as a sicario.
The first time like I saw them like chop a head off, I threw up. Like, I got really sick. But then like after the second, third, like it's like came normal to me, you know? It was I was either just gonna be scared and die, or just man up and just, you know, just fight and survive.
After the arrest of his boss, El Chino, El Gordo left the Sinaloa hit squad to become a drug smuggler, and that's when his story changed.
To be honest, like, and total, like I'll say like I made like at least 7 mil. But when I got busted, I had like almost to 3 mil. And I had 2 condos paid for in San Diego.
But he lost it all after getting convicted for possessing over 6 ounces of illicit drugs. He was given 10 years in prison, and ever since he got out, he's been living a low-key life. Now, cartels and drug trafficking organizations are constantly evolving. So while ex-cartel members remember what the cartels they worked for were like, active members tell more recent and crazier stories of what the industry of drug trafficking is like right now. And take for instance this cartel member, Pepe, who agreed to give ex-Special Forces soldier Jason Fox inside scoop into his life as a sicario.
Can you tell me about the last time that you were actually contracted to go and do a hit?
La última vez fue por una señora. Una señora que debía una plata y estaba teteando mucho para pagarla. Entonces ahí sí fue orden, bueno, le cobran la plata, apenas pague la plata, la matan, pero eso sí fue orden del cartel.
Fox then asked if that sicario had ever been in a situation where he had to kill a person in front of their family, and his answer was just as disturbing as the question itself.
Hay una persona que pasa por donde yo vivo, y a esa persona le matamos al papá. Y el pelado sabe, pero, o sea, me duele y me habla, porque me habla.
And his words just spoke volumes about how much he hated his life.
No tener un hogar, o sea, estar con mi familia, que era haber criado algunos o mis hijos, o todos mis hijos. Como te digo, no vive uno la vida normal. Uno no duerme tampoco ni tranquilo.
And finally, we have the confession of a former hitman who worked for a faction of the Mexican cartel, operating within the U.S.
I've seen the worst that you can see.
Did you end up actually killing people in prison?
While I was in prison, I'd rather not speak about that.
Martin Corona, an alias he adopted, was born in San Diego and had a rough upbringing. His troubled childhood drove him to run away from home at just 12 years old, setting him on the path to a darker life. He joined a street gang that eventually became his home.
And that became my family.
Are you involved in violence at this point?
Absolutely.
He was convicted of a crime and sent to a state prison where he formed alliances with the Mexican Mafia and eventually with the Arellano Felix organization. That organization might not be as popular as the Sinaloa or CJNG, but believe me when I tell you that they were just as dangerous. They were once one of Mexico's most powerful and violent drug trafficking groups. Founded back in the 80s by the Arellano Felix brothers, this cartel would dominate the drug trade along Mexico's northern border, more specifically in Tijuana. These guys were known for their brutal tactics, including kidnappings and assassinations, along with holding key routes into the U.S. But since Corona wasn't a sicario, he was more concerned with gun violence.
How does it change you once you have taken a life?
Something that Ramon used to constantly say, we're already dead. We're going to hell anyways. So there's no sense having a conscience about it.
But after a few years of riding with the cartel, Corona decided to pull out due to the killing of his best friend on a sidewalk.
The day I walked away from Mexico was the day my daughter was born. I held her in my arms and I told my wife right then and there, we're done.
But before he could do so, he was arrested on a weapon possession charge and eventually tested positive for cocaine consumption. But don't fret, cause he's out now.
There's mornings I'll wake up and I'll wash my face and look up in the mirror and I can still see the monster that I once was. You can never make amends for taking a life. You can never pay that back.